Welcome, everyone. My name is Bill Spangler-Dunning. I serve as the regional minister here in Virginia, and this is DOCTALKS, which is a ministry of the Virginia region, but also all are invited throughout the whole church if these issues are helpful. So today we're actually here with Reverend Dale Matherly, who actually just requested you call him Dale. Dale's doing some really cool work in adaptive change, and I just thought that in light of the world that we live in, just be really good to talk about this, hear about this, and he is offering a class that some may want to sign up for it. But we live in a world that needs us to think differently about our leadership for us to do better church. So with that said, Dale, I just want to say thank you for joining us today and tell us a little bit about yourself. And then again, we try to keep these as conversations for everyone, not so much a seminar. So tell us about yourself, and then tell us about adaptive change and how you work and all that, and then we'll have a little conversation.
Okay, great. I appreciate that, Bill. Thank you. It's good to be with you all. I live in Topeka, Kansas. My family of origin dwells in East Tennessee and Central Kentucky, and so my roots are there. And been in Kansas for the past 12 years. I currently serve as the intentional interim at First Christian Church in Emporia. And then the other work that I do is centered around, like Bill said, adaptive leadership. So I work as a leadership coach and teach adaptive leadership competencies and skills, and do consulting work around that as well with congregations and other organizations. Kansas has a program developed by the Kansas Leadership Center that was worked out with Marty Linsky from the Harvard program and Ron Heifetz at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And so it's a really unique opportunity, provides some training. And so as I think about this work, I think about kind of the gap we live with. We have concerns that we live with every day. Some of those have gotten a really sharp point on them in the past few years with the pandemic and other situations. And at the same time as we live with those concerns, we also live with aspirations. And those aspirations are where we want to go, what we want to do, what we want to develop in life with our personal ministries, as well as our congregations and our organizations. And so living in that in-between space, that gap, can be frustrating and confusing and uncertain and causes lots of anxiety. And so we try what we've always done, and we discovered that it doesn't work anymore. It did work, and we were thankful that it worked, but suddenly it doesn't work anymore. And or we imagine that we continue doing what we've always done and we'll continue to get the same results, except we discover that we aren't getting the same results anymore. And so one potential interpretation of the impact of the pandemic is that it's really accelerated change, and that uncertainty challenges all of us. And so it makes that gap even more difficult to live in. And so the adaptive leadership framework offers a way to navigate that space between our concerns and our aspirations. And so that's a really introduction to adaptive leadership, and glad to talk about particulars or questions that you have with regard to this. Just really want to have a conversation with you all and see how I can be helpful to you in your situations.
Well, Dale, you know that you've known me for a while. We go back a few years, but I'm a chaos person. I mean, I thrive in chaos. So I'm really fascinated by adaptive leadership. In fact, but part of it for me, I mean, I'm just wondering if this is what you're talking about, is that part of it is that it's not that I like chaos. It's that that if I can sit with it, in the right way, it lets me sort of think differently, sort of use chaos to help me know what other paths are available. But it does create a lot of anxiety, because sometimes I don't even know. I say a lot of times I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just trying to follow the energy of what I'm seeing as I'm listening to people, trying to just allow it to almost present itself. I might even say trying to listen for God. So is that what you're kind of talking about here?
Yeah, that's a piece of it. And I think sometimes we fall into the trap of we need to do something. And so we make a decision and we act, and it doesn't turn out like we anticipate. Adaptive leadership and dealing with adaptive change really invites you to slow down, pause, catch your breath, sit in the chaos for a little bit, and look at what's going on. And so one of the things that we, as folks in the church, are trained to do is offer interpretation. Every Sunday, the preacher gets up in the pulpit. I'm guessing that most of the folks in the room today are preaching on a regular basis. Every Sunday we step into the pulpit and, we offer an interpretation. This is what this text means. And so our tendency when we're looking at other contexts and other situations is that we tend to rush to interpretation. So if you can slow down, sit in the chaos, look around at what's going on, and notice, do the observations. What's happening here? Who are the parties involved? Without any kind of interpretation associated with that, but just identifying the pieces, you begin to see a different framework that's unfolding, and gain a different perspective before moving to make interpretations. And one of the key steps in the process of addressing adaptive change is making difficult, tough interpretations, complex, understanding the complexity of the pieces. And so slowing down and pausing is really an important part. And the other piece of that is not necessarily a part of adaptive leadership, but that I find really appealing to chaos as well, is it tends to generate creativity. If you sit with it and you don't fight it, it can generate creativity, because it generates questions. What's going on here? Who's involved? What's behind what are the driving forces behind this? And questions, as you begin asking questions are generative. They generate ideas, perspectives, and additional information to feed into the system.
Excellent. Again, remember, this is a conversation, so please ask questions as you feel the need to do so, or have something that we want to have a conversation about this. I'm going to pause. Any questions at this point in time? Okay, no pressure. Okay, no pressure on anybody. Go ahead.
Bill's got one.
The other Bill has one, Bill.
Yeah, I got it. You go.
Well, first, I just want to say that your background supports your comment that you enjoy being in chaos, because it's kind of a chaotic background. So in our region, Dale, there are a good number of congregations that are graying, declining in membership, declining in income, with large pieces of property to maintain. And I know I'm not telling you anything you don't already know about, but they often call on the region to come in once they recognize, hey, we're in a spiral. How do we get out of this spiral? And they want answers. And what I'm hearing you say, and I'm finding it very helpful, is that when you meet with these congregations, if you can find a way to just sit with them, and we've been trying to do this, and help them acknowledge the situation that they're in, and what has led to it, then it can generate creativity among the congregation. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, that's absolutely a piece of it, Bill. I think that at the heart of adaptive challenges and adaptive leadership are conflicting values. And so one of the things that you're describing is you've got congregations that are coming to you they've got a conflict of values. The situation is arising. They want to continue to live. They want to thrive, but their context and their loyalties, the challenges of graying, of decreased financial stability, are presenting questions, and they're these big complex questions that are really, that they don't have easy answers. And so if you can sit in the midst of that and explore where they're at and move to where they want to go, I think being able to articulate that aspiration, if you can move past wanting to be Lazarus, wanting to be the Lazarus story, and get to the Jesus story, resurrection, which isn't the same. They're not the same story, right?
Right.
Then the possibilities open up.
Yeah, that's well put, because what I find is if you talk to them about where they want to go, they want to go back to 1950 and be not resurrected, but or not reborn, but resurrected in the form they used to be, rather than being reborn into something new. So
yeah,
well put. Thank you.
Yeah, Lazarus goes back, right? He comes at Jesus, Mary, and or even 1990, Sarah. Yeah, that's right on target. Lazarus, Jesus shows up. Mary and Martha are like, if you'd been here, it wouldn't have happened. Jesus said, well, I'm here now. And he goes to the tomb and he invites Lazarus out. And Lazarus comes out of the tomb and then goes back to living the life he lived before.
Yeah.
And so Jesus comes out of the tomb. Mary doesn't recognize him, according to John. The disciples don't recognize him on the beach. He's walking through walls, except he's still got the wounds in his hands and his feet. Jesus is transformed in some way in the resurrection. And so resurrection is very different from resuscitation. And so that's exactly the story that fits here. I think that's a great naming, Bill. Thank you for doing that. One of the things with change is from the adaptive framework, the understanding is that change is not the problem. It's the losses that come with the change that are resisted. And so grief is a huge piece of understanding and working with individuals and congregations in that work, and beginning to name the grief so that you can begin naming the losses with particularity. And that requires, if you're facilitating that conversation, that requires a lot of patience and willingness to sit with discomfort, because the chaos level is going to go up with that.
That's good. I was thinking in the situations, I mean, as a regional minister, really as any leader in the church, sometimes we have this idea that when we come to a situation, we're supposed to be in charge, know all the answers. And in a way, sometimes that's what I feel like they're being asked, you know, I mean, please help us, save us, whatever, you know, I mean, they're given permission to have the answer. But that's never worked for me. I mean, part of that's a youth minister thing. There are two ways to, I guess, in my mind, to be a youth minister. That is my background, still will be until I finish. Is that with youth, you can either think that you have the answer and you bring it to them, and you everything you format is that, you know, here I am to teach you the faith, you know, and I'm going to give you the answer, and that's why we're going to do all these things. And my approach has always been less that and more to build relationship. Because as much as I have something to bring to the table, they have something to bring to the table too. And that means I've got to sit long enough to figure out what they care about, what they love, what their gifts are, and then bring to the table at the same time what I have. But that's a process. And, in Virginia, I wish ministers would just learn the idea, don't move the darn communion table for the first 6 months, at least wait and figure it out. But yet we also live during a time when we're all afraid of dying. So we think we got to change tomorrow. And that's with the part that I haven't seen as a long-term. We think that's what we got to do. So we change really, really quick, and then we get rebellion.
Sure.
So I guess what I'm saying, I'm hearing what you're saying as far as adaptive leadership piece, and I think I do a lot of that, but I think it's in the long term, it just means that half the time I go in with who I am, I've got gifts and skills, but it's being able to sit in that chaos or sit with a congregation with vulnerability that I may or may not be able to help, but I'm going to at least journey with you, and together we can figure it out. Is that close?
It does, and that prompts multiple ideas in my kind of running through my mind. But first is, we tend to think about authorities coming in with the answer, and authorities offer direction, protection, and order. That's what authority does, or supposed to do. Leadership is not authority, and the idea of adaptive leadership is anyone can lead at any time, by raising questions, by challenging norms, by exposing conflict of values, conflict of perspectives, by naming threats, risk, opportunities. And so it becomes an opportunity to leadership is about initiating a conversation. I think of it kind of like I think about love theologically. Love, we tend to treat in our culture as a noun, but I think of it in the New Testament, it's a verb. It refers to an action. Leadership, we treat it like a noun, but it's really a verb. And so one of the pieces of adaptive leadership is thinking about technical work and adaptive work. So if I have a bicycle accident, which is not unheard of, and I break my arm, I go to the doctor, and the orthopedist comes in after the ER doc looks at it and says, you got a broken arm, Dale, and it's going to be set and going to put it in a cast. And so they've done an x-ray and they've looked at it, and the orthopedist comes in and sets it and says, okay, in 6 weeks, you come back and you get your cast off and your arm will be good as new. Technical fix, very specific, you know what to do. The orthopedist is a specialist, right? But he's a technical specialist, comes in, fixes it, everything's good. I go for my annual physical. My doctor says, Dale, I thought we talked about this last year. You got to address your blood pressure. Yeah, we're going to do some meds and that's going to help you, but you got to change how you eat. And you're going to have to exercise more. And you're going to have to not sit either in a car or at a desk or whatever as much. Well, that's harder because that means I'm going to have to change something that's fundamental to how my family functions. Eating food, gathering at the table is central to who my family is. That's a core value of our household. And inviting others to sit at table with us is a core part of how we live. So not only now am I having to change how I live, I'm gonna have to ask my wife to change. I have to ask my daughter and her partner to change how they live. I have to ask my son to change how he lives. And I have to ask all my guests to change how to function differently as well. And so adaptive work is going to involve that change of values. And you're talking about inviting youth to come to the table and recognize that they have something to contribute. That's going to get messy, but it's the way you can build and grow and move forward.
Marilyn, go ahead.
Good afternoon to everybody. Sounds like to me, Dale, that the process could be, the sitting part could be long.
It can
And
be.
when you sit in it and people can get impatient, and I guess that's where the problem that you're talking about, the discomfort by sitting, it comes in.
Mm-hmm.
What is your recommendation there?
Yeah, so a key part of adaptive leadership is managing yourself. And so one of the components with managing yourself is really knowing what your buttons are, what your triggers are. And triggers can be affirmative and negative, right? Somebody can say, oh, to borrow one of what might be one of Bill's, hey, let's go hike on the Appalachian Trail. You know, he's going to find a way to make that happen. For me, it would be go walk in the desert. Like, let's go to northern New Mexico and hike in the desert. I'm going to be, okay, let's go right now. And so, or the trigger can be, it can be on the negative side, right? It can jack up our anxiety. It can cause us worry. And so, when we're waiting, we got to be able to manage that anxiety or that excitement so that we can stay present in the moment. And so for me, what I know about myself, that comes from honoring my spiritual practices. I have to keep my spiritual practices in balance, and I got to make sure that I'm doing those practices every day as a way to maintain my balance and be able to sit in the discomfort. Because you start asking someone to try an experiment to do something differently, and they might push back. And it might get pretty hot in the congregation, because they're going to start talking to their faction of people. And I use that word faction not in a pejorative way. I don't mean that in a negative, just as a descriptor. A group of people that have similar sets of values, loyalties, and would experience the same losses. And so they're going to be talking to their faction, and that heat's going to get turned up on you. And so being able to manage yourself, to know what your triggers are, to be able to stay present, to stay grounded, to stay centered is key. What goes with that is also recognizing what's your comfort zone. And so knowing where your limits are and exploring them and expanding them. And sometimes you might end up doing some technical work in order to expand your comfort zone, and then practice it over time so that you can continue to kind of stay in that space. Great question.
I have sort of a follow-up to that, which
Sure.
is coming at it from the opposite perspective of times where being willing to sit and listen turns into a different kind of comfortability with kicking the can down the road. And I have seen several congregations use the process, use sort of sitting and waiting as a justification to then stay in that, to maintain their stasis. So I've heard you speak about being willing to sort of take a step back in a differentiated way and listen and sit in that. So then where is the point then, or what does that shift look like, or how would you respond to then the need to not just stay in that stasis, but okay, we've named the grief, we've lamented, and now we need to actually do something about it?
Yeah, that's a really good follow-up question, Sarah. Thank you. I like to cook. And so if I'm making a vegetable stew, if I undercook the carrots and the onions, I don't let them stay there long enough, it gets to be really kind of a crunchy soup, right? Which is the rush to do something, right? Let's throw it together, put it together, and rush to action. On the other end of the spectrum, if I leave the carrots and onions and all the pieces in there, and I cook it too long, it just becomes a nasty mush. And so it becomes a piece of the of working this process is about gaining perspective, understanding what's going on in the big picture, and understanding when you need to propel things forward in a new direction. And you can't just sit. It doesn't just happen, right? You have to be intentional about it. And so the way in adaptive leadership that we talk about this is trying experiments. And so I think about a congregation I worked with at another point in time. They had every year for a decade known a shortfall at the end of the year. And so they had a practice in December of asking the congregation to make a 13th month offering, which is not uncommon. But what I asked the leadership to do was to go back and look at the giving over that 10 years and to note what happened in that 10-year period. And so they recognized that what happened in the 13th month was not a 13th month of giving. It was people caught up their pledges, and that's probably what they would have gotten anyway. And so it's what was pledged, what was committed. And so I said, let's try an experiment. Let's not ask this year for that and see what happens. Same thing happened. People gave what they pledged. And so members of that finance team were in lots of different perspectives with regard to that. But what they began to recognize is that people were giving at their routine rate, and it was going to happen regardless of what they did. And so they recognized that they had to change their approach to stewardship overall and change their approach to spending overall. And so it wasn't just about this 13th month, and it required that kind of expansion and development. And so from that experiment, they changed their approach, and to go into detail would take probably more time than we have right now. But as you do experiments, you learn, you reiterate, you generate the next step. But you can't. You're right. You can't stay in the chaos, because the soup just becomes mush.
So what I'm hearing you say, Dale, is adaptive leadership is as much an art as it is a skill.
It is. I think that's a really nice way to put it, Bill. I can teach you I think of it kind of like preaching. I can teach you how to put together a sermon. I can talk with you about the importance of exegesis. I can talk to you about the importance of interpretation, understanding contextual context, how to incorporate a story or an illustration into the sermon. But, my preaching today is way better than it was 30 years ago, because I've learned to refine the process. And I think it's the same with adaptive leadership. I think you can learn the competencies and the principles of adaptive leadership, but the way that you truly learn to exercise it is by doing it, and it takes time.
I want to confess that this is a complaint of my past. No. So when I first started out in leadership, and particularly when I was associate regional minister, my bosses wanted to send me to leadership school because they didn't think my leadership was accurate. They didn't think I was showing leadership, but what I felt is I wasn't showing the kind of leadership that they were, because there's like a third way. I mean, I love your analogy of, to balance, is that it's not that I was being passive, but what I learned is that if I tried to force too much, it didn't get done either. So if I was passive, nothing got done. But if I forced it too much, bringing along everybody doesn't work either. So there was this third kind of way that I was working on. And then Amy, my wonderful, talented wife, goes into counseling, and she, really helps me understand family systems. And that when you're counseling, you cannot just fix it like that. It is partly the relationship between the counselor and the person, the client, and that takes over time. And part of that is the leadership of the counselor almost modeling and reflecting back to enact change. And that doesn't work with a technical fix. And that's, for me, the adaptive leadership piece, which requires patience, which means that sometimes I realize that when I'm in the room, if I am too boisterous, if I'm too over the top, or if I step into a room and because of my authority or because of my energy or whatever else, I can shut down everybody else in the room. And so if I'm inviting people into that, there are times when I have to do both. Now, what I will say, and this is, again, I've said it many times, my son thinks I'm a benevolent manipulator. Sorry, Region, that's exactly what I try to do. Which is, what that means is that I am relentless in the fact that we need to change. We need to become better than we are. But I know in order to get there, that I have to read the people around me and invite and nudge where it works. And that sometimes means being patient when I don't want to be patient. It means constantly looking for a way to get there, even if it's not the path that I intended or thought originally we should do that. And I think that's harder to do because the fact is I don't really know how to get there sometimes in the beginning. I just know that that's where we need to go. And it literally means the word you're using. I need to adapt all the way along the way. But my experience has been that it tends to, that relationship back and forth as a leader, it almost as if I set a tone, and that actually has a way of changing people to start being open over time. But it does take longer to enact change in an adaptive kind of way. But Amy assures me that in counseling, that's it, to undo or to redo family systems or trauma that has happened over life or experiences that have made us in the way that we are church is not fixed in 6 months. So,
right. Yeah. Adaptive change is evolutionary. It is a slow process. It calls for you to show up all the time. And it ends up being something that you can't do it alone, right? You need colleagues, you need a peer group that you can process things with, that can offer different perspectives, not answers, but rather questions, by asking you challenging, difficult questions to help you get further up on the balcony to see what's going on the dance floor. I tell this story, it's kind of a classic in adaptive leadership. I had this experience personally. I went to my high school reunion. It seemed like everybody was having a great time. I was looking for a buddy. He was upstairs at the place we were all gathered at. So I thought the party was going great. I walk up the stairs. I'm halfway up and I start noticing that the dance floor really is empty. The band's really not that very good. And everybody's kind of leaning up against the wall like they did in high school. I get on up onto the balcony and that's exactly what's happening. And so you see that perspective shift and change depending upon where you're looking at it from. And so a peer group can help you gain that perspective, not by giving you answers, but by asking questions. And to think about introducing the principles and competencies of adaptive leadership, not just to clergy in your region or clergy on your staff, but beginning to introduce it to lay leaders in your congregation. And they might even have some exposure to those principles and competencies already from their places of work. And so it becomes a way in which you can begin to shift the way that the whole system works on the challenge. And it takes time.
So I know you teach a class on this. What kind of things, how long is it? And like, what would a person learn in the course?
Yeah, so the course is 8 weeks. We've been working in partnership with Disciple Interims. That's not exclusively in partnership with them, but we have been working with partnership with the folks at Disciple Interims. And what we do is we try to introduce these leadership principles, diagnose the situation, understand what's going on, explore tough interpretations, identify technical and adaptive work, explore managing ourselves, what's our comfort zone, what are our triggers, what are our buttons that get pushed so that we have a deeper awareness, energizing others, and seeing the ways in which we need to understand where people are, assessing the spot that they're in, engaging different voices, and then intervening skillfully, designing experiments, trying experiments, and then reiterating that process. And so it's an 8-week course that we also incorporate into that peer consultation group so that the folks that are in the class have a chance to engage that model that hopefully they can then replicate either with other peers in their particular context, with other clergy, or with congregational leadership. Becomes a way in which they can think about introducing that. And so the next class starts coming up the date. It begins on Monday, June the 12th. We've been following the Disciple Interim schedule. So Monday evenings is been the offering night for the training that Disciples Interims has been doing. So we've been following that Mondays from 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time. That's 7 to 9 Eastern Time, 5 to 7 Mountain, and 4 to 6 Pacific. And I can drop the link in.
Drop a link in the chat. And this, it's Disciples Interims, and normally you'd think clergy, but I have people in my region that laity who are leading different ministries. And would it be open to laity as well? I can't imagine why you wouldn't. So
it is. It's open to everyone. And I also dropped my email in the chat. You can reach out to me. Be glad to have a complimentary conversation with you and talk about particular questions about your context. That goes for anybody that's either with us today or that's watching the video later. And the link gives you an opportunity to sign up. One of the things that we're encouraging folks to do is to spend some time understanding and reflecting upon their challenge. What's the dominant challenge they're facing in their context right now, and that they want to make progress on. So that's one of to go back, Bill, to your conversation with Amy about fixing. Adaptive leadership is not about fixing things. It's about making progress. And so our class is called Everyday Leadership, Progress on Purpose. And understanding where organizations, leaders want to go with those organizations is really central. And one of the things that sometimes happens in churches, as well as businesses, is our aspirations end up really being very ethereal. They're hard to grasp. They're hard to hang on to. We kind of know what that picture looks like, but not really. And so one of the things is beginning to boil down your aspirations. What's your purpose? What do you want to accomplish? Where do you want to go? Paint the picture of where you want to go in detail. And so not as a fuzzy outline, but rather start getting some more fine lines in it and understanding what that looks like. Recognizing as well that it's going to change, it's going to evolve over time.
So yeah, that's I have found myself needing to like name goals. So I mean, sort of like I actually, this is where I want to go, and even if they're short term, and I know they might change over years, but at least I can know what they are, and I can articulate them to others around me that this is where we're headed. The adaptive piece is, no matter what, we're going to get there. We just got to figure out which path works, and we got to constantly adapt. Yeah. So I mean, one of the ministries that, and I got two of you were here, is the anti-racism team. I think does a lot of this kind of leadership style in the way that they present, and I am seeing that have a stronger impact in this region because of that, because of the way the workshops are held and the way the leadership interacts with different groups. That's my, I just, you know, I mean, it's great. We're doing several of them across the region, which is wonderful, but I was able to attend one recently. So I got the firsthand approach, and that's what it felt like. It felt like people who instinctively or have developed really strong adaptive leadership skills, because it's a hard ministry. So
absolutely. And that's great to hear that ministry is thriving in the Virginia region. I'm excited to hear that, and excited to know that potentially becomes a way in which that ministry thrives across the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
I hope Matt in Missoula made note of that, because he's on our recently reconstituted anti-racism team, and we're going to be figuring out what we're doing in a week, or on the 26th. So remember that, Matt.
I just have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm hearing that adaptive leadership progression and change takes time. Are you doing yourself a disservice following that type of leadership style if you do not set time goals? Or is it important or not important to set specific time goals to reach your progress or desired goal?
I think that's a factor that you have to assess as you address your particular challenge. And so I think it becomes difficult to assess the particulars of that, to offer a simple yes, you need to set time goals, or no, you don't need to set time goals, without knowing the particular challenges that you're referencing. So to go back to the example of the broken arm and the blood pressure, I break my arm, that's immediate. I've got to address this. This is a crisis. I've got to respond. The blood pressure issue with my personal health is going to take longer to implement those changes, but they need to be implemented in a reasonable amount of time, because if I just keep pushing them down the road, right? If I just keep kicking that can down the road, I'm never going to get there. And so there can be the need for a reasonable time allowance. You just might have to recognize that you might have to adjust it as you go. But it's kind of also back to that idea. If you don't cook the carrots and the onions long enough, they're still crunchy when you eat the stew. And if you cook them too long, they're just mush. And so that's the piece, to go back to what Bill was saying about adaptive leadership being an art. That's where the art piece comes in, is understanding how to manage the time piece, and that evolves, right? That's a skill that you continue to develop, and because the other side of this is, if you just sit there and you do nothing, racism continues to grow and fester in our communities, in our faith communities, if we don't address things. We have to make changes. And so, or financial difficulties continue to emerge, and they just continue to slide deeper into trouble financially. Or I'm just trying to think about different things examples that people have named today. The ways in which you make progress, if you're not sensitive, there is a time component. You got to pay attention to it. But there's not a hard and fast, it's absolutely this way or it's absolutely that way. It depends upon the progress that you want to make, and how that continues to unfold.
We have learned to continue the conversation. We constantly talking. Our theme in Virginia is let's talk. We try to put an end to racism. We trying to reconcile, but we know we have to have God first on our side. But we continue the conversation. And when I share it with you, sitting in it, sometimes sitting in it gets very discomfort. We get, and impatient. I do for myself. So this is really helping me. And as we continue the conversation and talking to others here in Virginia on our anti-racist and pro-reconciliation ministry and the team, and I'm going to boast the team right now, because we do have an excellent team of 20 people that's a part of the anti-racism, very diverse in the Virginia region. Of course, we have the greatest regional minister on this side of heaven. So that's how we are progressing with this ministry. And we're going to continuing the conversation, building relationships. And our prayer is that one day we will reconcile.
That's a really powerful vision. Continuing the conversation, that's a compelling, right? That draws me in. I want to be a part of that. That's inviting and encouraging, and as you continue to do that, that is going to draw more people. And so I celebrate that with you, and thankful for that witness and ministry.
I was thinking about the way that it's a kind of a balance. I mean, sometimes it, in the sense that when we're doing a ministry in adaptive change, an adaptive leadership style, I guess, is so one, I need to set goals so that at least I can tell people where we're headed, and I can tell myself where I'm headed. And then the other piece that I need to do is I need to always come reviewing those goals so that I can lift up, so people don't think we're just sitting around. I mean, so I can actually say, I can point to, here's where we've changed so far, so that at least we're making sure we're not sitting still, that we are moving, but at the same time give encouragement. And I think that may be another piece. I don't know if you do, but for me, it is that making sure I set the goals, but at the same time, making sure I lift up where I'm seeing change, because doing that also encourages more adaptation, more progress, and also make sure that I think see so many leaders get burnt out because it feels like we're not making any progress, and we're not making I don't think I ever feel like I got everything to where I wanted it to, but it also would be a disservice not to point out where I do think we are making progress. So for me, I just need to change the world, Someone told me that when I was young. I do. I just need to change the world a little bit. And so I need to be reminded that I am making a difference. So it's the goals. And yet at the same time, I feel as leader to make sure I'm lifting up those things, not as if we're solving all the problems, but we are making a difference. Because I don't want to get burnt out, and I don't want my people to get burnt out.
And I think that's that piece, two things about managing self. And I think, Marilyn, you asked me earlier about how to stay grounded in that. And I talked about my own spiritual practices being key for that. I would just echo that repeatedly, specifically in the church, and with clergy. You got to nourish your soul. You got to let God in. You got to let God do the work within you and feed you. In the class, where we begin is with the gap, inviting people to name their concerns, to really identify the challenges that they're facing, and then to describe in detail their aspirational. Where do they want to get to? And how are they going to know that they're making progress towards that? Because if the aspirations end up becoming like the compass, right? You're going to hike the Appalachian Trail, or you're going to go walk around in the desert in New Mexico. You got to know the direction you're going. You need some kind of compass to guide you, and so you have to understand what those aspirations are, and you've got to be able to repeatedly engage in communication with the broader circle of your context, of your congregation, about that progress, as well as your failures. You know, I tried this experiment, we tried this experiment and it didn't work, but we learned X, Y, and Z from this process. And so then there is something to, I'm talking with my hands and you can't see my hands, but there is something to lift up, right? There were learnings that occurred in the process. You just maybe, and so the iteration again and again of the experiments becomes important. You don't just do one experiment. You don't do one thing and suddenly everything's fixed. You continue to the iterations. You continue to adapt the experiment. Oh, so let's adjust it. This didn't work. This didn't give us the data with regard to this area, this concern. So let's adjust the experiment here. Sometimes you do learn. Oh, we learned that the example I used earlier, the congregation wasn't giving a 13th month offering. They were just giving what they pledged. And so that changed how the finance team functioned in the congregation. They tried some additional experiments, and they found additional ways to implement additional changes in the congregation.
I think I fall in love with that experimentation word. It's simply because I think when I'm working with churches that are struggling to figure out what to do, when it's not working, and it's been a theme lately in a lot of these doc talks lately, but part of it is if I can just build enough trust and relationship to get individuals in the church to agree to experiment with something and agree that it might fail, but that's not necessarily a failure, but just try something new. If it doesn't work, then move on to the next thing. Just getting them some kind of movement is the experiment piece, but it's hard. But I like the experiment piece. And it can be fun if in the context of trust and relationship. So.
Yeah, and so if you want to implement change, it happens. Adaptation unfolds through experimentation. Adaptation does not occur from most often from a lightning strike. It happens through that slow experimentation and process, and it needs diversity. From the perspective of adaptive leadership, you need diversity. you need diversity in the system. If the system is too homogeneous, it will guarantee to fail. And so you need a robust, diverse component to the process as well.
I think I like that last point too. I mean, a leader needs to always keep seeing who's not at the table, which voice is not there, and that a role to do that. So one last chance for questions. Coming at the top of the hour, I do respect everybody's time, and I want to thank Dale for willingness to be on Doc Talks today. Again, for those listening later, please we'll put the link for the class, and just wish the best for all in the life of the church, that we serve the God that we follow. So any last questions? All right. Well, thank you all for stopping in for an hour, and I hope it was helpful. Thank you for joining.
Great
Doc.
job, Dale.
All right.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dale.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
all so much. Appreciate it.